I'm very happy actually for this invitation, Chris. I think the British Computer Society is a really good venue to disseminate some of the work that we have done in this area, and we're very happy to be here. So just to begin with, could we start the presentation, Daniel?
Mm-hmm.
So Chris, and also the people from the audience, do you recognize this guy? I want to see in the chat people commenting whenever you see this.
I don't recognize this guy. My pop cultural reference has just failed.
Yeah, maybe we can move one forward.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's the infamous Pablo Escobar, or better to say, if we move backwards, Daniel, is the actor that represents Pablo Escobar in a TV show called Narcos that became very popular in Netflix. So just to give you a little bit of context, I'm originally from Colombia. I was born and raised in Medellin, in the same city as Pablo Escobar. And I was, well, during my childhood, it was the time that this guy was doing the drug business, and he was getting quite a lot of dirty money from the United States and across the world. And of course, my city was one of the receivers of this money. And people might think it was wonderful, but I saw the bad consequences that changed completely the Colombian society in terms of corruption and violence. And basically, well, the basic problem that happened was that the financial services were not ready for something like this. And just basic controls will actually start to stop these kind of things. So we move forward, Daniel, again.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy became one of the richest men in the world. And well, just to skip forward, we can start talking a little bit about why it's important, the problem of financial crime. So this hasn't disappeared. I mean, the last 30 years, we still have a very huge evidence on why the financial crime keeps alive. And one of those is the sanctions from the regulators across the world. So just in last year, it was an astonishing number. It was 10 millions in fines. So I mean, if a company like EalaX could have just like one of those billions, I mean, there's a lot we could do with that. But can we move forward, Daniel?
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna segue here a bit myself. I know we promised your synthetic data and financial crime, but I just want to show how diverse synthetic data is, and this is something that's really close to my background. I come from a pharmacological/neuroscience background, and now in financial crime. And these sort of areas have very similar issues. You have the lack of data, you have a lot of security issues with sharing this data. You know, the GDPR is always hanging heavy over someone's head. But I just want to illustrate here with this diagram, like how much benefit something such as an electronic health record can do to a patient and the improvements it can do, especially in terms of clinical trials. And segue again into something different. What can we do with synthetic data? Well, one of the really neat examples I have, and this is not just applicable to medicine, this is in financial crime as well, is to really tailor the machine learning solutions. You know, as time goes forward, more and more sort of data is taken from the user into machine learning because it's quick to process and it is getting shockingly accurate at this time. But can we really trust the machines with everything? Well, at this point, no. That's why we really need to take a step back and understand that what they're using is going to be great and fantastic, and what they can give us is going to be even better. And Edgar, I'll weave it back to you now, and you can talk about, you know, what is expected from synthetic data.
Yeah, so thank you, Daniel. And well, what Daniel was mentioning is one of the domains actually also a lack of this, let's say, huge research in the area because of the confidentiality of the area. So this is why well, a report from Gartner that was just issued last December mentioned that by 2024, 60% of the AI will be trained using synthetic data. And this is basically because many domains actually are not ready to jump into the rail of machine learning. And Probably Daniel has experienced this a little bit, didn't you?
Yes, unfortunately, data has been a very sore spot for me. It's a lot of time to feature engineer that data. There's a lot of time to make it actually workable. And obviously the lack of data is a big sore point again.
Yeah, I believe, Chris, had you worked before with synthetic data?
I have used synthetic data only a few times in my career, Edgar, and mainly in relation to load testing new computer systems, servers, etc.
Exactly. I think synthetic data, just to explain a little bit the concept, because there might be people in the audience that doesn't know exactly what is synthetic data. Synthetic data is data that is generated by a process, you can just call it by a computer. And this data aims to replicate certain aspects of data that has been, let's say, observed in the real world. So in our particular case, financial data is one of the effects of people doing transactions in the real world. So every time someone moves money from one account to another one, it leaves a financial trace, and this is storing data in the financial institutions. But because of constraints that we have at the moment by the regulations and really, let's say, justified constraints like GDPR, companies need to take good care of this private data or confidential data because it's sensitive. It talks about people, it talks about a lot of things that concerns the privacy of the people. So Daniel, would you like to talk a little bit about the capabilities of synthetic data? Why synthetic data? What do you think it should be the thing that we use for solving several problems or shortcomings?
Well, to illustrate an example, when I was looking into the financial crime domain, I could only find 3 data sets out there. And ironically, two of those data sets were actually created by you, Edgar. And the last one was a very, very harsh encoded UOB banking set. And this is the data that is available for people to actually analyze, for researchers, for anyone. If you want to have any intellectual contribution to it, it's hard. You're never going to get your hands on this type of data. So one of the things I'm always a pioneer of is make quality data for people to share and use, because you can find some very amazing things in between. Perhaps something you found or not found, someone else will come in and improve or find something new.
That's something really interesting, Daniel, what you mentioned, because 10 years ago, when I started to work in the area of financial crime analytics, I was learning quite a lot of machine learning, and I wanted just to go straight to the data sets and apply them. So I started my PhD in Sweden. And during this time, we had a partner that wanted for me to develop controls for money laundering. And when I asked for the data, they say, the system is currently under development. So it means we still don't have any data, but we would like to have good controls. And I was starting to think, how can you build good controls using machine learning, without any data? And it came back to the problem that is mentioned, that many people use synthetic data for doing testing. And I think that was the very beginning of my research, that I aim to replace real data with synthetic data. But later on, I found out that there is a lot more to take advantage of synthetic data. So one of the highlights of my research was in 2017, when I chaired the pacing dataset. And this pacing dataset contains a very interesting relations of agents, and then there are some agents that actually aim to follow normal behavior, so whatever normal is described. With things like coronavirus, the normal situation changed a lot, and everybody here can understand that. But the interesting part in the synthetic data was that we needed to actually create synthetic data using grounds in the real data to actually make it valuable for the analytics. And that's why I turned my research into the generation of synthetic data. And then later on, we use the concept of agent-based modeling that is basically to construct a synthetic representation of the real world using some understanding of what happens in the real world. And this doesn't need to disclose any sensitive information about the customers. And the nice and interesting thing about agent-based modeling is that we can later inject the fraudulent behaviors or financial crime behaviors that will help us to enrich the synthetic data and add labels for machine learning. And this is probably a topic that you have been working very recently, Daniel, with us. Maybe you want to mention a bit of this.
Yes. So with agent-based modeling, there's many ways to generate synthetic data. And I find that one thing with agent-based modeling, which really actually seals the deal for me, is its innate flexibility and just understanding that agents, you can put a human interaction into this agent and logically deduce, is this agent operating as you assume he is? Of course, you're taking a lot of the footprint that this agent performs his actions on from your data, from the original real data. However, as someone who's looking at this solution, you can actually come in and say, hey, this isn't right. This isn't what I've seen the data. This isn't realistic. What's going on here? And I think out of all the synthetic data solutions, agent-based modeling has something really special right there.
Yeah, there is indeed a lot of benefits of using synthetic data. So just to focus a little bit on the slides that we currently have, and just to present a little bit the concept of why synthetic data is valuable in this aspect. Just in the first square, you can imagine that this is the full data set of transactions inside a financial institution. And you can think about the magnifying glass as the financial control that an institution puts in place to stop or to detect or to find financial crime. And as any control, you will find some criminals, but at the same time, you will find some innocent people, and you will wrongly tag them as criminals. So the important part is understanding exactly when we have a control is how much people we are tagging innocently, and also how much people we are catching out of the criminals. But unfortunately, the situation in the financial institutions, and this is something that we call the hidden crime paradox. The financial institutions have restricted or very little access to the hidden fraud. The hidden fraud is the criminals that get away with the crime, and then they are not being detected by the financial systems, and that's why the regulators come later and start to issue these sanctions. So imagine if we have the power of simulation, and we can actually create a scenario where we know what is the true negatives and what is the false negatives. And just before we go, could you move back 1 second? And any of the possible scenarios that we have, we can create different controls and test just in this example, we have 3 different controls. So one of the controls actually don't do better. They just find more innocent people as criminals, and they find less criminals. So we can understand that this is probably not a good control. Another control finds more criminals, and this is the ideal situation that we want. Or another situation could be that we just shift the focus and we go to a scenario where we find different criminals and we tag different innocent people, but we don't really improve the efficiency. So a key aspect here is, if we move to the next slide, is if we are able to actually measure the improvement, we will be able to actually develop new controls, and these new controls will be deployed into the financial institution. And if we can do this 100 times before actually we deploy the controls inside a control environment with simulation, we will be able to actually avoid all the cost of the false positives, and also miss the opportunity to actually find financial crime.
Maybe my bank would stop embarrassing me then and declining my card randomly.
Exactly. I think that's one of the biggest problems, and many people here, you can even comment in the chat or have any questions for us if you want to express that you have been financially defrauded and you were left without your credit card useful in a foreign country, for instance. That's one of the cases that happens a lot. is basically because detecting financial crime is not an easy task. And so one of the things that we are working with EalaX is to develop in these controlled environments where the financial institutions can have the upper hand in this area. Can we move to the next one? So basically, the key aspect is if you can measure it, you can't improve it. And this is something that is not being said by me, but I repeated several times from Peter Drucker. And this is the case in security. So it's very hard to actually measure the hidden fraud. And this is what we aim with synthetic data.
Mm-hmm. So I'll take over here a bit. We've been throwing a lot of buzzwords at everyone, machine learning, data, imprinting data. And I want to take a step back and just highlight, in the previous slides, we showed that, people get misidentified, criminals do get identified, but there's a balance to this. And two things are at work here. One would be just a simple thresholding approach. All banks have like a transaction monitoring system, and they can set a simple threshold saying like a person may take out this amount of money. However, if they cross this threshold plus some other factors, they may get flagged as fraud. And this can turn the transaction denied. Another popular solution that people have been using is just applying machine learning to kind of manhandle all of this. Now, over here, I have a simple machine learning I call it a classic fin crime solution. So you can attach a lot of extra stuff here to make it more robust, front to the back to the front. But essentially, you start with your secure data. At the start, you get your labels through their analytics and pre-processing. Then you start training and testing your model on this data to really understand what's going on. Once you're happy with your model, you can deploy it. And the problem here is that a lot of companies deploy multiple models, but if the data you trained on isn't great, it's going to start flagging a lot. And then they have to really scurry to launch a new model or deploy a model which is actually, working. We saw this a lot in Corona. Everything shifted, like all the dynamics shifted. People were spending differently. People were not purchasing what they should be. Criminals were doing much different things. So all the machine learning algorithms that were overlaying banks just went mad, and things were declined very quickly, or people were misidentified all the time. And that caused a big problem. And one thing that I want to propose as well is look at the future of data. What happens if a scenario like this, brings something to our doorstep which we can't really deal with? Well, we can start generating data to prepare ourselves. So as you see here, you have the same thing. You have a secure data pipeline which you go. However, you can actually generate more data at this step, and you can really make it more robust. You can inject new typologies, you can do some predictive modeling, and you can have more labeling. And with machine learning, now we're really at the advent of something we refer to as deep learning. And essentially with deep learning, the more data you have, the better your model. And this has been proved many, many times before. So if you're a company who's lagging behind on collecting the data, your models aren't going to be that great. So this is another really good use case. And then another thing I want to propose is benchmarking the model with the data you have. You can really set up a quick process back and forth to tell you, okay, this model is going to work or this model's not going to work. You don't have to keep going back and forth with pre-processing and labeling new data and feature engineering, because the data you're going to have is going to be there. So your models will be trained quicker, and then you can deploy them more efficiently with some knowledge of how they're going to deviate. And as I said, why is a benchmark needed? Well, perhaps Edgar, you can comment a bit here as well.
Yeah.
Why do you want to benchmark? Why benchmark the data?
I think this is a very important slide, but before we move on this, could you go back once?
Mm-hmm.
So just checking on Chris, is everything clear so far for you?
Looks great, Edgar, yeah.
That's great. I understand that some of the concepts that we have been talking here are a little bit technical, and when we talk about machine learning, some people might get scared and close the ears and the eyes and not hearing about this. But just to make a very simple analogy with what we're trying to do, and you can see an eye, and well, many people here, including Daniel, has glasses, and in order to actually understand what was the problem with the eye, so Daniel, for the glasses, he had to go and perform an eye test. One of the most, let's say, common eye tests is this board that you have the big letters in the beginning and the small ones at the very bottom. So when you start seeing the big letter in the very beginning, that is usually the E. It's not the E of EalaX, but it's the E. If you cannot see that, then your optician will say you really have a problem. And it's the similar thing with the synthetic data. So we can stress the financial systems with synthetic data that is handcrafted with pretty obvious fraud or financial crime. And if an institution is not able to actually catch the pretty obvious crime, so it means it's a really big problem that they have. And understanding just this in the very beginning is it might sound very obvious, but it's not obvious for the regulators and for the authorities.
So the data isn't there to begin with, which is the biggest problem.
Exactly. So we can move to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
So why a benchmark is needed? So financial institutions across the world are usually regulated by institutions. For instance, in the UK, the FCA is the one that aims to control the Financial Conduct Authority. And so what these institutions do is that they don't have the capacity to go to the more than 1,000 financial firms that are in the UK. So they selectively go to the ones that they think are the priorities, perhaps by volume, perhaps by name. I don't know. They have their own criteria to select. So once they do this, the due diligence starts with a questionnaire. And these kind of questionnaires are sometimes, just to go a little bit easy on this, they aim to ask you if your controls are good. So if you say your controls are good, you will just check and then move to the next question. And if they notice that you have some sort of, let's say, problem understanding that the controls are in place, because they have smart questions to actually analyze this, they probably will schedule a further visit, and they will probably dig into your data and go and try to understand exactly if you have problems in financial crime. But this process takes way too long, and it's not efficient. So it's kind of exhausting some of the valuable resources that we have in the regulators, and also inside the financial institutions, because the financial institutions should be able to tell the regulator right away that, yeah, I have been running my benchmarks, and my benchmarks tells me that my risk is medium low, or my risk is high, but I'm working towards protecting myself in these areas. I think we need something that really tells us what are the gaps in your system, and how, not only what are the gaps, but also how can you improve them. And this is a problem that happens a lot in the financial institutions. So we need to understand first what are the problems, and also what the value proposition that we have at EalaX is not only to let's say understand these valuable metric inside the institutions, but also to provide high quality synthetic data sets, so the benchmark is actually believable. And in this topic, maybe Daniel has been working quite a lot on.
Yes, indeed. Benchmarking is one of my favorite words, because I hear it almost every day. It's interesting. You can benchmark a lot of different stuff, but for me, a benchmark is always going to be a standard of quality that you want to achieve. And this is how you can tell people that everything is going okay and to trust your data. But to establish a benchmark, there's many hurdles that need to be reached, because what are you benchmarking against? What is the gold standard? Now, I just want to go through like a bit of a process of synthetic data, from where we were and from where we could go, and for some who already are. So, for example, you have your raw data. As displayed earlier, you can do a statistical analysis, a network analysis, basically the agent-based modeling we displayed, or any other technique. You get your parameters, then you have your quality synthetic data, nice and safe and secure. Now, at this point, you kind of need to quality control this thing to understand how close is it to the other type of data. And you also need to factor in privacy, because, okay, you've made synthetic data, which, okay, it has the analytical value, it works, or it's really close, but can someone engineer this data or reverse engineer it? Well, then you need to recalibrate, and you go back and you adjust your parameters and generate a new synthetic data, which is actually past the quality control. However, this process can take a while, and there's many ways to actually speed this up, and you're kind of losing a big piece of the puzzle here. So once again, how can we adjust this? How can we fix this? Well, for example, one thing we want to add is fraud behavior to enrich the data. but we also want to understand if this is working. Then you can actually put it through some quick machine learning for the fraud detection and to benchmark it really quickly to understand, does your data still have any analytical value? Is it quite there? As we've described earlier, machine learning is going to be a fundamental cornerstone of many areas, and we want to know that this data is actually useful in that regard. You can make the best synthetic data ever. It can be super private. I could just grab a marker and start scrolling all over your data. It's private now. But what's the analytical value? You're not going to be able to see anything. Sure, it's private, but you're not going to use it. Now, based on this benchmark, we can actually go back and do some quick calibration. And this nice little synthesis of everything actually provides a clear view of, where you are with your data and how you can use it. And now we're going to take a step back from synthetic data and introduce a very tricky case study known as money laundering, Not so simple as in and out. Edgar, you can take this really quickly. You've had a lot of experience working in different sectors on these particular issues.
Yeah, I mean, in the area of financial crime, we have been talking about basically two things, fraud and money laundering. So fraud and money laundering are two different concepts, but they are related. So when we're talking about fraud, is a person of an institution that is being economically defrauded. So it means he has lost possession of some economic assets. And in terms of money laundering, it's not that clear the concept of who's losing the money, because most of the time is the government, is the state, and the repercussion of this in terms of money laundering affects the people. It's not only the government who is affected. And just to recap a little bit of my background. So what happened in Colombia was one of the problems, that violence and corruption. But in the UK, we're not away from those things. I mean, if anybody goes to buy a house in the market, it's going to compete with the criminals. And then if they can offer more money than you, the free market is going to raise the prices. So definitely things like money laundering affects everyone. So basically fighting money laundering is a task for the financial institutions, and is for the benefit, for the well-being of the whole society. It's not only the government and as in the United States says, the Uncle Sam is gonna get benefit on this.
Yes. So I'm just gonna recommend that if you want to have a further look into the world of money laundering, I really recommend the Dark Money Files. They have a great podcast going on, and I sometimes just sit down, after a long day and listen to some fun talk about, what's going on in the world of money laundering. Not everyone likes to end their day that way, but I guess I'm a special case.
I totally agree with you. I think the understanding more what money laundering is will make us more aware as a society in how to fight it. And I think this is one of the problems that happens in the financial institutions, because it's hard for them to actually identify or completely, let's say, 100% tag some transactions or some individuals as fraudsters. Instead of that, they report them to the authorities as suspicious transactions or suspicious activity reports that is commonly known as SARS. And the regulators are full of this. I mean, it's like 500,000 per year in the country, isn't it, Daniel?
Oh, indeed. But don't you worry, we'll take you through the whole world and show you what the issue is and where it ends and who's responsible.
Yeah, and the amount of money that is being laundered behind the table is astonishingly big. I mean, people talk about billions, trillions, and people talk about estimates, but the reality is nobody knows for real, because it's so much in this case.
So we have actually been fortunate enough to receive account statements, encoded, of course, of money laundering activities. So we've had a fair bit of insight on how everything works. And we want to present some of this to you, and a bit of a sneak peek. So where was this data from? Well, as you can see, the flow of money. These are just some of the bases that the money laundering operations touched, the bases which are actually known. It can be far-reaching. It can affect the globe. Money is going in and out. But at the end of the day, a lot of money can quite easily just vanish. And we'll take you through how this money actually vanishes and, what happens to it after. Here, as I said with the sneak peek, these are their accounts, and as you can see, the interactions are pretty clear. They didn't really seem to care much about hiding their activity. Some money launderers do, but these accounts, they were pretty confident in what they were doing. Maybe you want to say a few words about this graph, Edgar?
Yeah, so in terms of money laundering, there are three main activities. So the first one is the integration. So basically, sorry, the placement. So it's when the financial criminals, when the criminals inject the money into the financial system. The second one is called the layering. So the second phase, the financial institutions lost track of where the money comes from because it moves from institution to institution, and it goes so many times that it's hard to track because there is not sharing of information. And the final part of the money laundering cycle is when the criminals take away the money and use it for buying their Ferraris or paying the expensive holidays in the Caribbean, or in the worst case scenario, they also use this to finance terrorist activities in several countries.
I heard Panama is a pretty nice place.
So this data that we got shows very clear some of the insights of money laundering as a service. That and important thing about this is to actually being able to have a understanding of real data that can tell us the patterns, because the patterns is what showed Daniel in the previous slide. Understanding exactly some of the patterns of behavior, why these network typologies are formed when you have a money laundering as a service, is quite important for machine learning to being able to identify whether a transaction is suspicious or not. Mm-hmm. So this is the key aspect and the value of this data that we have.
Now the tricky thing is, not every money launderer is the same. You could kind of separate them into different tiers. So the first one, I like your analogy for the first one, Edgar. It's the stupid money launderer guy, the person who, does a criminal act and just deposits the money into their account as if nothing's happening, and they think they're not going to get caught. But then, people try to savvy up and okay, they give their friend some money, and then the friend transfer it to them. These are easy to catch. Then they start getting a bit more sophisticated. You have groups of people banding up and being, okay, if we send money here and there, and maybe there, they'll lose a trail. But these people can still be caught fairly easily. Now, here comes the complicated cases. These are the laundromats. These people actually make legitimate businesses and have very sophisticated routes to actually target and route the money. And their end goal is to make this money seem as legitimate as possible towards the end. Now, and then you have the people at the very top, the brains of the operations. These are almost impossible to catch. They make the trends, and the people below them, they use these trends. So the ones at the very top, these would be the epitome of hidden crime at this point. Now, we'll take a step back again, and we can give you a simplified view of the laundromat. So, sources of income. All of these, drugs, theft, bribery, blackmail, these can be considered a criminal act, obviously, and if you perform that and you get money from it, what you have is a criminal property, as the legal jargon likes to say. Now, what happens with criminal property? You want to place it somewhere, but okay, placing it in a bank is an easy way to get caught. So this is where a lot of the lower tiers, they actually get caught quite easily here. They try a lot of different solutions, but in the end, the source of the funds are pretty obvious. Now, the smarter ones, they do the layering, they go through the laundromats. And the money just keeps pinging and ponging throughout the whole digital sphere until it reaches a place where the trail is long called and you can start integrating this money. And once you integrate it into different areas, like maybe some real estate in New York, or perhaps, something more local like London is your thing, or perhaps you just want to diversify your portfolio. Well, at this point, when the money reaches here and you invest and you resell these assets, that money's clean. No one's going to be able to trace it back properly. And even if they do, they'll have to go through hell to be able to prosecute you. Now, who's in charge of actually prosecuting these people? Oh, it's the MLRO. Edgar, I think you've met a few MLROs in your time. What would you say? How would you describe an MLRO?
First thing is I admire them, and I also feel sorry for the limitations they have in the roles, because I think it's a lot of responsibility in one person, and some of these people are actually liable for things that can go very wrong into the organization. So these people are the ones who own the risk. So they had to be the people that feel the pain. So it means they are in the financial institutions the ones who have to handle the risk. So they elaborate a number of policies, a number of process that aims to mitigate the risk. So unfortunately, some of this risk is not mitigated properly, and that's why we have the situation that we have right now. So one of the things that we aim with this research is actually to give more tools to these individuals for them to be able to perform the job better, and therefore to reduce the financial crime.
And hopefully get a good night's sleep as well.
Exactly. I think that's the key aspect. I don't know how they go to bed thinking about that criminals will be doing things on their back. Is there anything you want to add to this, Daniel?
Well, I think we should explain, how do they do this, and how do you report AML? Well, this can go back to a suspicion of activity report, so aka SAR. And as you can see here, we have had a significant increase of them. But going back, who files SARs? Well, 75% are usually banks. Otherwise, other financial institutions can file some as well. And the rest, gambling dens, leisure centers, if it's suspicious, they can file about it. However, there is a difference between being suspicious of someone money laundering and having this money in your possession, and that's where a DAML comes in. So a DAML is a defense against money laundering. So when you file a DAML, this means this money is in your possession, and most likely the people who have this are banks. And if they do not report this, they can be fined a lot of money, or this individual can get sanctioned. So you have a good couple of million just sitting in a bank and no one can touch it for a very long time. Now, I'd also like to introduce Defense Against Terrorist Financing, DATF. You really don't want this one. When you actually file this one, expect the government to pay you a nice little visit for an extended period. So that's kind of the breakdown. And I just want to add, go on.
Also to add, reporting terrorist financing is extremely hard to understand and detect, because I think some of the terrorist activities and the events that have happened in the past have been done with minimal amounts of money. So sometimes just a person can ask for a loan in a bank and self-finance these things, and if they are like the kind of the blow themselves, they don't even need to pay the loan.
Indeed.
So it's even more fraud.
And now we just take a step back. What if we wanted to generate synthetic data for this? It's a complex. It's not as simple as just like retail fraud, where okay, you have a transaction that may be fraudulent by an individual. This is complex. People are really complicating things. They're trying to sound legitimate. How do you go from detecting someone who's actually laundering money to false positive? Oh, Edgar, what do you think? How would you do this? How would you detect this type of person?
I would say it's not an easy task, and the biggest problem here is that the situation, the criminal behavior is evolving, and one of the things that we put as a value proposition for EalaX is to understand better how this person perpetrate the crime. Therefore, we can add it into a model, and we can use this model to actually train machine learning and understand a bit better the behaviors. I think one of the key aspects in a field that is very obscure is to try to understand better how the criminals behave in order to actually develop proper countermeasures, and not only to lower the risk of being defrauded or being abused from the financial system.
Indeed. And I think what's essential, unlike other types of fraud, is to make a really good risk score. And with this, you need a lot of demographic data. You really need to know your customer. And this is something that we're really trying to push in our synthetic data, having this level of information to be able to identify AML.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's exactly one of the values propositions that we have. I think one of the key aspects here, Daniel, is to be one step ahead.
Oh, yes, indeed.
If we try to be reactive and not proactive, we're gonna lose this fight against financial crime. And therefore, we need better tools. We need better weapons, if you call it that way.
Yeah, and just to think, like, we could fix a lot if we have the solution as well. I mean, so this is something I like to call the compliance iceberg, because at the tip of this iceberg, you would be just a customer in the bank. But these are all the processes that someone in a bank has to go through. The compliance team, obviously, just to onboard you, all these type of risks. And this takes a lot of time. And the problem is, from another side, marketing is pushing to retain the customer. So compliance is always stressing to do this. And one big issue is, like, as a customer, you can get pulled below this iceberg, if you get investigated.
Sorry, Daniel. I'm not sure if it was only me, but I lost you for a second.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, it could have just been a minor cutout. Yeah, so with this type of compliance iceberg, it's pretty easy for the customer to just get pulled below it, and then they have to deal with a lot of these issues themselves. And one thing of making a good solution is being able to reduce this iceberg and just keep on melting it. That way you can help both the customer and the compliance team who is managing all this. Because if you have good synthetic data to train and risk score on, then you don't need to onboard your customer as strictly. You're going to be more confident in your AML solutions actually being able to provide detail.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the missing points here, is that it's very hard to actually understand if the people that we are onboarding are actually legit and are the people they say they are, especially nowadays that many of the services are onboarding people online or by telephone, so they don't even get a good look of who's the person. Therefore, I think the understanding what is a good and bad behavior might lead to actually more success into the system.
Indeed, and that's not the only people we could help, because, for example, you have this data and you can analyze it like we're doing, and you kind of get an understanding of, okay, this is about where you would reach in terms of like catching the criminal, like a very average money laundering operation. But if you actually manage to really look into this data and start to think and create synthetically generated data with different scenarios injected, that kind of aggregates all this different money laundering data, which is usually so securely packed that you wouldn't be able to analyze this yourself, or you wouldn't be able to ship this. Banks like to keep this all really secret and to themselves. If you have this type of system, then perhaps one day you could actually start ascending the pyramid and getting closer to the brains of the operation.
Yeah, I think that's the situation we're hoping to reach in the further years with technology. I think there is not been another time in the history that we have the technology at hand to actually fight financial crime with better odds to win this fight. And I think anonymity and privacy are some of the technologies that or the requirements that are abused by the criminals. But since we are all individuals and by law we need to respect that, we need powerful tools that would help us to have the upper hand. And I think synthetic data and the process that we're showing here is one of many that will contribute in the future to actually get hands on who are the criminal minds behind, and we will open our eyes actually, and with perfect vision, hopefully.
Oh, well said, well said. Well, just want to do a little special thanks to the team. They've been a great help, and none of this would have been possible without them.
Yeah, that's correct. I think, well, just to mention a little bit, me as a founder, I had the privilege to work with talented people, not only experienced people like the advisors, Graham Barrow and Ulf Norinder, but also with young talented people and very knowledgeable in the area, as Paul, Kellyanne, and yourself, Daniel.
Oh, thank you. You're calling me young. I like that. It's been a while.
There is a reason why you're here, and it's because every single person in EalaX is making the best to actually do these things, and you're not the exception, Daniel. So I had to thank you also for being part of the team.
Likewise. Well, thank you for leading the team, obviously, and hiring me.
Thank you.
And finally, we reach our questions and contact, and we're just 30 seconds over the mark. So, well, maybe 30 seconds to a minute. So I think we did good when it comes to
You
speed.
have done it incredibly well, and thank you, gentlemen, both so much for a thoroughly engaging and very high energy talk. There's an awful lot to unpack in this presentation, and some very fancy graphics, I will say, to go along with it too. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks to you, Chris, and we're happy to answer some of the questions that you might have yourself or the audience.
We've got some questions in. So just turning, before we get into technology, EalaX is a young company. It's a startup, and by your own admission, you want to be the next tech unicorn. So how is your business development going? How are you getting on at the moment?
Yeah, so just to tell you a little bit about EalaX, and that's a very good question, because we try to make this presentation non-commercial, more based on a topic, but EalaX is a young company that has been doing giant steps in the last year to actually become one of the, let's say, or the most recognized provider of fin crime analytics using synthetic data. And we have been in the last year participating in important events, and also in scenarios with the FCA. So we were part of the FCA Data Sprint in July 2020 that led to one incredible project that was called the Digital Sandbox Pilot, that was led by the FCA and the City of London. And this is one of the scenarios of innovation for the fintechs in the UK. And only 30 companies actually were selected, and we were happy to be selected because of the work that we had done. And we were the only company in this whole digital pilot that were able to produce content for the same digital pilot. So that's an interesting part. Part of the trajectory that we also got is that we got a couple of grants from Innovate UK that push the boundaries of what we could do, and we are about to actually launch our product, or MVP, and we already have engaged a couple of let's say testing partners, trial partners for this, but we're happy to actually receive contact from you in case you're interested, in case you're from the financial services or know someone that will help us. And at the same time, we're actively looking for funding to actually keep the dream alive.
Fantastic. And how is that going? Is it positive response?
It takes time. I mean, it's not people don't give you money for free, so it takes time to actually do these things. But we're on track. We're on track with the important networks of angel investors.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, thinking about the presentation, the points that you've raised, in my mind, there's been a lot of conversation in recent months and years about the big risks of artificial intelligence, and presumably from that synthetic data, because of, in particular, creating artificial bias, confirmation biases, and that sort of thing. It seems to me, in creating synthetic data, how can you be sure that your models are actually able to A, avoid these types of biases, but B, and perhaps more importantly to the financial services sector, be able to see what currently can't be seen, the next big exploit in the financial system, things that the banks, the bank security operations, the police just currently aren't thinking about?
That's a really good question, Chris. Daniel, do you want to take this one? Oh, yes, definitely. So I don't think there's a day that goes by without reading something about explainable AI, and in hand that should go with explainable data. And something we've always tried to do in our solution is to make it as explainable as possible, to not only understand that where this data comes from, but also limit some of the bias that comes from the prior data as well, in essence. And this goes a lot of back and forth when it comes to machine learning explainability, because there are a lot of different solutions you can kind of unpack and put around sort of making the machine learning more explainable and stopping some bias. And I think synthetic data is in such a place where it can be used as a pretty amazing tool to stress test machine learning for explainability. And this is something I'm actually really interested in looking at in the future, because I think if you have data which can create really, really fast and you can adjust it here and there, you might be able to actually explain some of the reasons your AI tends to make certain decisions. with some of the active solutions already out there.
Do you think it's possible that AI could actually come up with a new exploit on its own?
Yeah, I think it's possible, honestly. It's definitely possible.
Just to mention a little bit about this question, I'm also contributing to an organization called For Humanity. And it sounds like one of these organizations, non-profit organizations that goes to the village, but it's actually an organization that works towards the unbiased in machine learning and this kind of things. So it's a topic that is very relevant for EalaX, and EalaX is actively playing a role in actually making the AI more fair and not to be abused by few.
And I think some of the interesting thing here is we can look at agent-based modeling as being I'd probably at least say a fairly explainable way of generating synthetic data, because you can extrapolate a lot of human interactions that these agents are doing and understand them, compared to something like running a, generative adversarial network, and I believe that's more a black box at least.
See, it is a huge problem to unpick, and obviously the difficulty in
that.
Oh
yes, I mean,
you're never
you're
going to
gonna
know
have to
that
give me a
there's a
couple
bias
hours
in it.
here.
So, the obvious question: has your technology actually been used yet in apprehending any criminals?
Yeah, well, at the moment, we are in the process of launching the MVP. So this MVP will allow several financial institutions to test our technology. And so one of the things that we will do during this POCs is to actually measure the impact. I think that's one of the important advantages that we want to do, is to measure the impact. But at the same time, even before we launch our POCs, we have been contributing to the digital sandbox pilot for other organizations, third-party providers that have the capabilities to actually develop groundbreaking technologies for stopping financial crime. So with the synthetic data that we have provided to the digital sandbox, and also some other complementary data sets that people have been developing, this company had the opportunity also to run their POCs before actually going live. So basically, even before we launch, we had been contributing to other companies to develop better solutions. And I think that's one of the key aspects. If I might mention also about the project that Daniel mentioned in the beginning, the pacing simulator. So since 2017, has been extensively used by several practitioners, enthusiasts, even by financial institutions. I have seen many citations. I think it's more than 50 citations right now from scientific peers. And so just to mention some, the MIT, IBM Labs, and Watson Labs in New York have been working with the pacing simulator to develop new concept for detecting money laundering patterns. So it means the technology is being there, it's been proved that it helps institutions without access to confidential data to develop the technologies without accessing the data. Of course, there is certain adaptations that they need to do when they get into the real institutions, but the techniques that they develop wouldn't be possible without having some testing data.
Oh yeah, definitely agreed there, Edgar. Like, I think synthetic data can really bridge the gap and make some SMEs, which is smaller companies, much more competitive. Because if you're a giant like Amazon, Facebook, Amazon, you can just snap your fingers and you will have data. You will have the money also to pre-process the data really quickly. And how is a smaller business supposed to catch up to that? You can't.
Exactly.
But perhaps synthetic data can bridge a bit of that gap.
Therein lies the value, because you're basically empowering small businesses as well as the large guys with the same technologies, the same tools and techniques. You're bringing up to the standards of the big players. So it's an incredible advancement for holistic security. In terms of implementation of your technology, where do you see it getting applied? Is it something that is more involved in the design and testing phases of financial service systems, or is it something that you see as being constantly part of live production testing that is being rolled through on live systems as part of the testing of not only safeguarding systems you're building, but the safeguarding systems the bank already has?
I think if I might take this, Daniel, one of the things I have seen is that testing is just a very small word that abstract concept of I'm trying my thing and does it work, yes or not. And I think the concept that we are trying to push here of benchmarking goes beyond that, goes beyond testing. And testing falls a little bit short because what we want is not only to be able to test, but also to optimize them. And in order to optimize them, you need two things. For machine learning, you need high quality data, which we are providing with in the form, in the shape of synthetic data. And second, you need to verify that what you're doing is actually better than what you had. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with machine learning, not only in this domain, but in several domains, that most of the data scientists deploy machine learning algorithms, and they hope that their algorithms are going to perform better in the real world. So we're trying to minimize the risk that is going to underperform. So basically, this is something that institutions need to run, hopefully very frequently, hopefully daily, hopefully at most weekly, to keep updated their controls, because we're not generating synthetic data as a magic forecast, as a magic ball to forecast the crime that's going to happen in 10 years. We're trying to do a little bit of analogy like the weather, that you see the clouds and you see this is cloudy, you might think it might rain, you might be wrong, but 90% of the time you might be right that it's going to rain. So keeping the synthetic data assets updated with the new data is one of the key aspects that we want to do with the process of automatization of the process of generating synthetic data. That's the value proposition of EalaX.
Thank you. A question here from Paul. Does it make sense to use ABM to generate synthetic data to preserve privacy only as a place to start?
I have to say, it totally makes sense. I think privacy is one of the things that the organizations need to protect from the customers. So the use of agent-based modeling is a very good starting point to generate synthetic data assets that can be shared with third parties without risk of disclosure. So I think this is one very good starting point. Of course, the challenge of producing a good ABM is something that not everybody manages. So that's why EalaX is bringing the expertise to help financial institutions that they don't need to be experts in simulation. We are, so we are for you. And therefore, we are abstracting the complexity of simulation in single steps for the financial institutions.
And how do you see the threat landscape of what you're tackling changing over the next few years? What's coming?
A lot. I will just quickly take this one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think a lot is going to come. If we've seen by the last couple of years, there is a lot of shifts. There's a lot of unrest. And when there's unrest and shifts in society, there's going to be a lot of crime following. And money is, I mean, there's so many ways for people to make money. I think one good example is cryptocurrencies just exploding. And in the wake of such explosions, we have so many scammers following up. I guess a case study lately was Elon Musk was doing a SNL skit, and there was a cryptocurrency which was very popular that people were keeping their eye on. And you had so many fake websites and links appear offering this cryptocurrency to steal people's information. And that's just one of the things. And another example is the GME stuff, with people just earning a lot of money over something. And this is, I know, this was unheard of almost. It's an interesting time, I must say. And Edgar, I think you can add on a lot to this as well.
Yeah, so what I expect to see is synthetic data, and especially the tools like the EalaX is producing, to become the next best practice in the financial services. So they need to adopt tools that keeps them up to the standards of high quality controls, and I think synthetic data is going to play a key role as predicted by Gartner.
Well, there are more questions coming in, but unfortunately, gentlemen, we are out of time this evening. So I would like to thank you both once again, Edgar Lopez and Daniel Turner, as well as the rest of the EalaX team, of course, for your time and very informative presentation this evening.
Thank you very much.
You can find out more about EalaX at EalaX.com or at EalaX on social media. Before I sign off tonight, I would like to say, please, if you like this content, if you have any comments, let us know down below the video. Hit the like button and, of course, hit the subscribe button. And finally, before I go, I want to mention that we're now rapidly approaching the end of our 2021 program season. Our seasons are scheduled around the tenure of the Committee of BCS Hertfordshire, which will be coming to an end in September. With this in mind, I'd like to put a call out. We're looking for new and enthusiastic volunteers to come onto the committee, to be willing to take a strong leadership role in how we manage our offerings and the output of BCS Hertfordshire. From planning these online events, hosting them, to guiding our return eventually to physical meetings, and making videos, improving our general output and widening the exposure of the BCS and helping to make society better. If this is something that interests you, if you have any ideas of how we can improve our output and you'd like to get your hands dirty in spreading the message that we try every 3 weeks here at BCS Hertfordshire to put out, then please get in touch with myself via the chat, via YouTube, via hearts.bcs.org. And I look forward to seeing you soon at one of our committee meetings. However, for the time being, I wish you all a good evening and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.